Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you're joining us from. My name is Noah Young, and welcome to the Maroon and Gold Family Connections. Today I have three wonderful guests with us. The ASU West Campus Dean of Students, Dr. Cassandra Aska.
Hi, Noah, and hello, families.
And then we also have two proud parents of a Sun Devil who's graduating here soon. Congratulations, Askia and Chanel Stewart.
Hello.
Hello, thank you.
And today we're going to be discussing what you can expect when your Sun Devil comes home for their first break. So to start off, what can you expect whenever your Sun Devil's coming home?
Hopefully what you're going to expect is a lot of excitement to have your son, your daughter, that family member home with you again. They've had a tremendous experience being away on their own, being independent, being in college, learning new things, meeting new people, having great new experiences. And they're probably going to be ready to come home and decompress and relax a little bit and probably use that time to process their entire experience as they simultaneously start to think about, I'm going back next semester again. So it's an exciting time, I think, for the student and for the family.
Absolutely. And so with those experiences comes quite a few changes. And so as a parent and as a family, when your student's coming home, should any of those changes worry you, or maybe what changes might cause some concern?
Sure. I think you will see changes, and I'm going to ask the stewards to chime in here, but it's not uncommon for students to come home and they want to sleep a lot more than what you're used to. Chanel is laughing with that one already. They might want to eat more, less, or different foods than what they left home being comfortable eating. Certainly probably trying to do some things that they may not have been able to do while they were away at school because they were spending time studying. And so decompressing can look like many different things. And so what did you all experience when your son came home for the first time after being away in college?
Exactly what you said, a lot of sleeping, a lot of eating. A lot of times he didn't want to eat what we fixed. So it was like, I'll be back, I'm going to the chicken spot they don't serve on Sundays and bring it home and eat with us. So, I mean, there was a lot of changes, but, you know, coming up with him and, you know, knowing who he is as a person, we didn't take that as a bad thing. I just took it up as, you know, he's growing, he's relaxing right now, let him have his time. Sure. But yeah, you do see the changes, and it is to be expected.
And I think you raise a really good point. When our students go home, they are relaxing. They've been in a new environment. They've been on for all this time, perhaps in some ways figuring life out for themselves, which is exactly what we want. And now they're coming home and they don't have to figure anything out because they've been here. This is known to them. But then utilizing that time to process everything is really important.
Yeah, to being productive while you're home. And it is easy to relax and try and enjoy that time, but it's also important, like I said, you know, to maintain that productivity. So with that being said, whenever our students are going home, of course, when they left, I'm sure they had some sorts of rules, chores, you know, getting up early, maybe certain things like that. How can you go about reestablishing at least some sort of base ground rules with your student when they come home? And then with those ground rules, of course, there may come some challenges to those. And how could you deal with those issues that would come up with that?
Sure. Communication is always going to be key. And I think that word is easier said than practiced oftentimes. And for families, thinking about what is it that they are expecting their student to do when they come home before they come home is usually a bonus. Simultaneously, though, I think families also need to be comfortable in asking their student, what are you wanting to accomplish when you come home? When you are back at home with us, what are you going to do? What are you not going to do, in the sense of maybe some of the things that parents may have expected before? And so the dialogue has to be open. And if there are expectations that family members have, I think communicating that up front. For example, if there's a sibling, having an understanding, we need you to take care of your sister, your brother, whatever that might be, making sure that that's communicated in advance. What are you all's thoughts?
I completely agree. I think setting things like curfew, they may not have the same curfew as before. We have to remember that they're an adult now, so that will change, but making sure that your expectations are set up front and that they understand your expectations and that they set their own expectations as well, so that communication and dialogue happens ahead of time, so that there's no gray area or that they're assuming that they have free reign, like they did before, especially because in our instance, we do have 2 younger girls in the house, our 2 daughters, and so they see what he does.
Right.
And so it was important to have that discussion up front so that he understood that it wasn't us necessarily wanting to keep restrictions on him. It was about respecting the household. And so we've had to learn to have a household where he's been away, and as a family, we're adjusting to him coming back. And so we want him to feel welcome and in a safe space, but also respecting the rules of the home. So it's about finding that happy medium and boundary, but not being afraid of the communication up front, that dialogue.
Yeah. And there's a lot to keep in mind there, when you're coming home, especially as the student, how is the home doing? How are all these different factors? And so what might be some good strategies in order to prepare everyone in the family for the reunion of you coming back, or, the student coming back, obviously, from break?
Sure. The conversation taking place in advance of the student coming home, I think, becomes important. I think also if family members are wanting to have specific dialogues with their student, letting them know that ahead of time, and not having the student walk through the door and then all of a sudden the family members are on them, constantly. As we shared, we know the students need to go home and benefit from being in that space in order to decompress. So keeping that in mind proactively, I think, really is helpful. But then simultaneously being able to have the conversation to say, I do want to talk with you. I do want to share with you what I've seen, what I've observed, and get your thoughts about, am I seeing, am I understanding things correctly and in the way in which you want. And then also being able to say, how do I continue to support you? How do I understand that you have grown? What does that look like? And how do I support that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that you touched on it a bit, but going into maybe more detail in these conversations that you're going to have with your students, sometimes there might be some awkward tension between, between you and your family, or the student and the family. So how could you go about relieving that as a parent, that kind of awkward tension?
There may not be relief.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I think it's more about preparing yourself and preparing your student that's coming, for what's ahead. Letting them know ahead of time, 2 days in advance. Look, I want to talk to you about some things that I may see going on, or that's going on in the future. I want your input. I want your honest opinion of what's going on. So I think setting the expectation, being proactive, letting the student know that, your child know that we're going to have the discussion, so they're not blindsided with questions once they re-enter in the home.
Right.
So I think that's important.
And I think it's okay to have awkward conversations.
It is.
I think it's okay to have those difficult conversations, perhaps. I think what we're encouraging the students and the families to be comfortable with is to be uncomfortable, because the student, their thinking has evolved. That's what we want for them. Their values and understanding their values and how they own it for themselves has evolved. And so sometimes I think it's difficult just to be present and to listen to your student and not judge or question, but rather ask questions for understanding. And I think that's okay if it feels a little awkward.
And on that same idea then of how much you've grown as an individual, or how much the student has grown, obviously some of our families have younger siblings, and some of our students have younger siblings, exactly. So there's going to be quite a big difference in the responsibilities and in the freedoms that they're allowed. How can a family, going back kind of to the diffusal of the awkward conversation, but how can a family kind of diffuse that tension between the younger siblings and now the older sibling coming up, who might be able to go out and stay 3 hours, past their curfew or whatever, sleep in 3 hours later than they are, or what it might be.
I think that was kind of a challenge for us, along with the fact that we would cook something special for him when he would come home. And, it's this whole big thing that AJ's coming home. And I think we have to be careful not to forget that they're there and have needs also. So I think it is just talking to them and preparing them for him coming home, or your student coming home, and preparing your student for making special time for their siblings as well. So I find that, not only we have time together as a family, it's important that I have time with him alone so that we can talk about things that we can't talk about, you know, in front of the kids. And then also that they have that special time.
Right.
So each one of us get to have special time with them. And I think that kind of helps for them to understand the need, you know, because tomorrow's never guaranteed. So I think ensuring that, you know, you guys are really living in the moment when they come home and explaining that to them. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other part is that respect piece, right? And we talk about that often, that it may be okay that your student has different curfew hours than what they did before they left and different than from their siblings. But it's all encased in being respectful of the individuals and all of the individuals that are present in the house. And so letting the younger siblings know, hey, she has grown, and so this is okay for them to be a little later when of their curfew. When it's your turn, it's going to be the same thing. That's what you're going to want too. Right. So let's not use it against him or against us as parents with saying, you're not being fair with us and with him. But it goes back to the communication, the honesty, the respect that I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we've had definitely some great points here today. And is there any additional advice that you'd have for any families that you want to leave us with?
It could be different. It could very well be different, but that different doesn't mean it's bad or worse. It just means that your student is getting what they went to college for, and that is to grow as an individual. And we're all evolving with them, just in different spaces. And so it takes time for us to understand what that looks like and what that might feel like and how we work through that together as a family.
Yeah. And I agree. I think because they're coming back a changed person.
Yes.
Mentally, probably physically, and their whole mindset is probably going to be totally different than the 4 years when they left. So I think for parents, just being acceptance and open and understanding to they have grown.
Yes.
Their opinions changed, but they still matter. And just, you know, just accept them for who they are as a person, but yet still continue to guide them along the right path.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that that communication is the key as far as when they get home, you should still know them to a certain degree. So it should be a constant communication while they're gone so that they aren't so much of a stranger when they're coming home. You know, that with social media, there's all types of different ways to stay in contact, even if it's not just a phone call, but really so that you have those talking points to be able to talk to them. And
one of my favorite questions that I would encourage families to ask their student is, what did you learn about yourself? And what does that mean for you moving forward? At the end of the day, love them just the same. Hug them as much as you need to hug them and have fun because they're home. And then in a couple of weeks, we want them back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all the time that we have for today's Family Connection. I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, go Devils.
Absolutely.